kid, I just couldn't believe that a city could disappear, and a city in my own country. The fact this could happen on Christmas Day seemed to me all the more impossible. People's lives were changed permanently, and a lot of people who went through Cyclone Tracy talk about before and after Tracy. 35,000 people were airlifted from the city in the 10 days that followed. A lot of them never came back. So the city that was rebuilt was not going to be the same city. This is one of the things I talk about, the evacuation and the effect it had on people then, and the effects that evacuations can have on people in disasters today. Another thing that I'm really interested in is what happens to people's pets in a disaster. And certainly in Darwin, one of the things that happened was that a lot of dogs were shot in the streets in front of their owners, and a lot of people were incredibly traumatised by that. I was curious to know what had happened to the Indigenous inhabitants, people that weren't living in houses. And there was very little of that kind of material on the public record. It's often not talked about it, but disaster doesn't affect everyone equally. And actually, it certainly didn't affect women and men equally either. And that's one of the things I look at when I write about the evacuation, is the fact that women were told they had to leave Darwin, men were not told they had to leave Darwin. And there's a sense that women couldn't help rebuild the city, that they had nothing to offer it. Some women were desperate to get out, I hasten to say, but other women really wanted the chance to stay there and be with their husbands and to keep their families with them. It was considered unsafe and unhealthy to do so, and a lot of women were distressed about that to this day. So I wanted to try and unpick what happens after one event, and it's 40 years now since Cyclone Tracy, and I wanted to think, look, what's happened in the 40 years since? How do people remember disasters? How was that particular disaster remembered? What kind of art, what positive things can grow out of a disaster? I look at things that I found challenging to think about, like rebuilding and engineering, and how you put houses back together, and what are the logistics involved. I was surprised by some things. Some of the most moving records that I read were by police who'd gone through the night itself and almost lost children or wives, been seriously injured themselves, and then were expected to get up and work for 3 days straight, rescuing people, opening morgues, shooting dogs. It was intensely traumatic for them, and the kind of simple spare language in which they've written about that experience I found quite extraordinary. It also was just an incredibly interesting political time, and I do try to write about the politics of the day as well, and what it was like to be alive in the 70s. One of the motivations I had in writing the book was thinking about where we are today, the fact that climate change means they're going to be not more cyclones necessarily, but the cyclones that there are more likely to be stronger, and the amount of damage that happens and the amount of time it takes to recover from a cyclone is something we have to increasingly take into account, much as we do have to think about droughts and fires further south. In one Aboriginal language there is a saying along the lines of, "I make this place as I go." And when I read that sort of guided me through the writing of the whole book, really, that we do the decisions we make about how we live, how we respond to events like these, the kind of policy we make in response to these things happening, the kind of development we do after a disaster, all these, they're not isolated things. They affect us for tens, hundreds, thousands of years to come, and we have to start. Sometimes it's painful to think about this stuff, but I think we do need to think about it.